He thought she'd never find out, that the secrets he buried deep under polished lies would stay hidden forever. But she already knew everything, and the smirk on her lips hinted at a storm he could not escape. From the moment he walked into the office that morning, confident and untouchable, she had been watching, listening, piecing together fragments of his betrayal like a master strategist playing a game only she knew the rules to. Every whispered phone call, every evasive glance, every late-night meeting he thought inconspicuous had been documented, memorized, and catalogued in the silent vault of her mind. The first time he ever underestimated her, she let it slide, learning his patterns, understanding the rhythm of his arrogance, the subtle ticks of insecurity he buried under his tailored suits and forced charm. She wasn't just angry, she was calculating, and before this day ended, the empire he thought so secure would begin to crumble like sand through his fingers. But first, she smiled, because she knew the power of appearances and the shock value of patience. Before diving into the chaos she intended to orchestrate, a quick note to everyone watching: if you love a story that hits hard and never lets go, hit subscribe, smash that like button, and leave a comment, because this journey is just beginning. And trust me, you won't want to blink. That morning, he strutted past her desk, tossing a casual good morning over his shoulder, completely oblivious to the storm gathering in her eyes. He had spent years thinking wealth and charm were the armor no one could pierce, but she had discovered the exact chink in his confidence, and she had plans far bigger than any impulsive confrontation. It started with the subtle erosion of trust around him, little things that seemed harmless, misplaced report here, a confusing message there, a rumor planted in the right ears at the right time, began shifting the equilibrium of his carefully crafted life. Colleagues noticed the cracks first, wondering why the man who always commanded the room now seemed hesitant, defensive, almost vulnerable. She watched, savoring the small victories like a conductor reveling in the opening notes of a symphony designed to unseat a tyrant. But the masterpiece wouldn't stop at professional humiliation. She had calculated the social fallout, the private betrayals, and the network of allies he had counted on to prop up his life. All would unravel because she had a vision, and every move he made unknowingly fed into it. He checked his phone constantly, confident that no one could infiltrate his private messages or predict his next step. But she already had. She had crafted a silent surveillance system, not through technology, but through observation, intuition, and leveraging human error. Friends, partners, even his closest confidants were already pieces in her puzzle, acting as extensions of her plan, some knowingly, some unwittingly, and every thread pulled brought him closer to the revelation that nothing in his life was safe. One evening, as he celebrated a minor professional victory with a glass of expensive whiskey, she was already 3 steps ahead, placing subtle hints that suggested a breach in his inner circle, not directly implicating anyone but planting seeds of paranoia that would fester and grow. The way he laughed, oblivious to the tightening net, fueled her determination. The arrogance he believed was his strength was the very weakness she exploited with precision. And it wasn't just about revenge, it was about exposure, about showing him that the empire he had built on lies, manipulation, and betrayal was nothing more than a fragile construct that could shatter under scrutiny. She knew his weaknesses intimately: the pride, the fear of embarrassment, the obsessive need for control, and she planned to hit everyone with a calculated subtlety that made his undoing inevitable. Over the following weeks, she became a ghost in his life, appearing only when necessary, letting her actions, or sometimes her inactions, speak louder than words. He began noticing minor inconsistencies: files, misplaced casual colleagues asking pointed questions, messages he could swear he hadn't sent appearing in the wrong hands, and the tension grew, gnawing at the confidence that once made him untouchable. Every late night she spent poring over his calendar, every casual coffee meeting she arranged with the right people, every smile she directed at him was carefully designed to mask the storm she was orchestrating. It wasn't immediate. She understood that the thrill of slow, methodical dismantling was far sweeter than instant gratification. He started losing small battles first, minor professional missteps that suddenly seemed catastrophic, alliances that dissolved without explanation, whispers in the office that questioned his competence and integrity. These were not accidents. They were the first dominoes falling, and she stood back, watching the chain reaction unfold. And yet, he remained blind to the architect behind his unraveling, assuming it was fate, coincidence, or the natural course of business, never once suspecting the quiet, calculating woman who smiled at him across the boardroom table. But the real twist of her plan went beyond professional ruin. It delved into his personal life, exposing the hypocrisies and betrayals he had thought hidden. Invitations he sent were met with perfectly timed absences. Confidences he shared were twisted subtly to sow doubt, and secrets he had hoarded like trophies began leaking in controlled bursts to the people he valued most. And just when he thought he was regaining control, she struck again, moving in ways that seemed invisible, untouchable, and inevitable all at once. The stress began taking its toll, his confidence faltering, his decisions hasty and uncalculated, and she knew that every misstep he made only accelerated the perfect collapse she had envisioned. As the days passed, the office transformed from a place of triumph to a stage for his slow humiliation, a theater where he was both actor and victim, and she the unseen director pulling every string. People began noticing a change, subtle comments about how distant, distracted, and reckless he had become. Even his friends outside the office started questioning his judgment, and every interaction became a reflection of the silent havoc she had sown. And through it all, she maintained the facade of normalcy, smiling when necessary, quiet when it served the purpose, and watching as the tension mounted. She had become a master of psychological chess, anticipating moves before they were made, planting suggestions in minds, and letting natural curiosity and fear amplify the effects. His health, his relationships, his sense of invincibility all eroded silently as she executed her vision, proving that the most dangerous weapon was patience and knowledge wielded with surgical precision. By the time he even began to sense that something was wrong, the damage was irreparable. The cracks he noticed were just the surface. Underneath, the foundation had been hollowed out systematically. Every mistake he made reinforced her control, and every attempt to confront the chaos only deepened it. In private, he began obsessing, trying to piece together what had gone wrong, who had betrayed him, never suspecting the very person closest to him was the mastermind. And she let him chase ghosts, mislead him further, and crumble under the weight of his paranoia. This was her revenge, not outbursts, not overt attacks, but a silent, intelligent dismantling that left him exposed in every aspect of life he had once dominated. Slowly, inevitably, he was learning the harsh lesson she had long prepared him for. Nothing built on deceit lasts, and those who underestimate the quiet ones often pay the highest price. He thought he had seen every angle, anticipated every risk, but she had been several moves ahead from the start, and the realization that he was losing control began creeping in like a slow, suffocating fog. That evening, when he returned home expecting comfort, he found subtle signs that nothing was as he thought. His carefully arranged life, the routines he took pride in, the sense of order he clung to like armor, had all begun to unravel without his noticing. A misplaced envelope with sensitive documents, a message on his phone that seemed innocuous but carried the weight of exposure. Even the faint scent of perfume he didn't recognize, each detail was meticulously placed. A reminder that he was being watched and manipulated in ways he couldn't even comprehend. She had infiltrated not just his professional life, but every space he believed private, and the deeper he tried to assert dominance, the more he stumbled, losing faith in his judgment and second-guessing every decision he made. And the brilliance of her plan wasn't just the chaos she engineered. It was the timing, the subtlety, the ability to remain invisible while orchestrating an unstoppable sequence of consequences. At work, he began noticing minor crises that seemed random but were strategically aligned to destabilize him. Key clients subtly withdrawing support, miscommunications spiraling into reputational threats, colleagues questioning his reliability in the gentlest but most calculated ways. And still, he couldn't see her fingerprints. She was everywhere and nowhere, a shadow that grew stronger as he weakened. Socially, she manipulated interactions with precision. Friends who had once been loyal began to doubt his intentions because she had whispered carefully chosen half-truths, questions phrased to ignite suspicion without appearing accusatory, creating rifts that he couldn't mend. And each time he tried to confront a perceived betrayal, she had already anticipated his response, preemptively deflecting and redirecting, making him feel that the universe itself was conspiring against him rather than the single, determined woman who had orchestrated it all. In his personal life, subtle patterns emerged, invitations ignored, conversations interrupted at critical moments, private files mysteriously disappearing. Every comfort he sought, whether validation, support, or advice, was replaced with uncertainty, doubt, and the gnawing sense that he was no longer in charge. Nights became restless, haunted by the nagging awareness that something was wrong, yet incapable of pinpointing the source, the stress slowly eroding both his physical health and mental stability. She watched, often from a distance, letting the tension build, understanding that fear and confusion were more potent weapons than confrontation or violence. And in the rare moments when she interacted with him, she maintained an impeccable facade of neutrality, even warmth, hiding the cold satisfaction that coursed through her veins as his carefully constructed reality cracked. She didn't yell, didn't accuse, didn't expose, let the consequences of his own arrogance and deceit do it for her. A quiet storm that grew in power as he faltered under its invisible weight. The pattern was relentless. Each day, each interaction, each decision he made was subtly undermined. Critical emails were misdirected, contracts slightly altered, alliances subtly eroded, and through it all, she stayed invisible, the puppet master behind a cascade of dominoes falling perfectly into place. Even his closest allies started questioning his judgment, misinterpreting his actions, and he was powerless to correct the narrative because he didn't yet realize who was truly controlling the story. The thrill for her was in watching the perfect disassembly of a life once considered untouchable. She had studied him for years, learned his weaknesses, predicted his reactions, and engineered an environment where every misstep was amplified, every flaw exposed, and every victory for him turned into a defeat. Slowly, she escalated the tension further. One evening, she sent a casual message, innocent to anyone else, but laced with information that triggered a cascade of crises: a business partner questioning a deal, a close friend doubting loyalty, a family member misinterpreting intentions. It was subtle, invisible, yet devastating, and when he finally began to notice the accumulation of setbacks, he panicked, desperate to regain control, unaware that the very moves he made to protect himself only accelerated his downfall. She remained calm, strategic, patient, allowing him to believe he could fight back, while ensuring that each action reinforced the pressure. The psychological toll was immense. Paranoia crept into his nights, sleepless hours filled with obsessive calculations, endless replaying of encounters, searching desperately for the point where he had gone wrong. He began second-guessing everything, from his choice of words to whom he could trust, slowly isolating himself, creating exactly the conditions she had anticipated. It wasn't enough for her to ruin him professionally. She aimed to dismantle the person he thought he was, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The social manipulation was equally calculated. Invitations he sent went unanswered. Subtly rearranged meetings created the illusion of being excluded, and casual remarks in conversations were twisted into public doubts about his character. Each incident seemed minor but collectively chipped away at his confidence, all carefully observed and logged in her mind for later exploitation. As he spiraled, she added layers of pressure. Financial moves subtly misdirected, minor errors in judgment highlighted by others. Trust eroded among those he valued most, each a thread in the web she had woven for years. And still, she remained the quiet observer, never interfering directly, letting the system of her creation tighten around him like an invisible noose. The genius of her strategy lay in invisibility. She made him feel that every problem was a product of chance, misfortune, or the incompetence of others, never suspecting the deliberate, meticulous orchestration behind it all. Even small interactions became weapons. A casual compliment misinterpreted, a question left unanswered, a piece of advice twisted into suspicion, all perfectly executed to maximize impact while leaving her spotless, untouchable, the architect of chaos with a smile that suggested nothing more than concern. And when he tried to reach out for help, even then, she had anticipated his desperation. The people he turned to for guidance had already been influenced subtly, primed to doubt him, mislead him, or withhold information, leaving him frustrated, angry, and increasingly isolated. Each of his attempts to regain control only played into her hands, accelerating the very outcomes he feared most, making him question his sanity and judgment in ways that thrilled her. The psychological domination was relentless. He became obsessed with what he couldn't see, what he couldn't control, unknowingly dancing on the strings she pulled effortlessly. Every victory he once celebrated was replaced by creeping doubt. Every relationship he valued became a minefield of miscommunication and mistrust. And yet, she never revealed herself. She allowed the suspense, the uncertainty, and the slow-burning pressure to do the work of years in a matter of months. His reputation began to suffer, not through scandal, but through subtle shifts in perception, engineered with surgical precision. Friends, colleagues, and even family began noticing changes: hesitation, indecision, vulnerability, and, whispered quietly, wondering what had changed in the man they once admired. He tried to adapt, to compensate, to fight back, but every move had been anticipated, every reaction accounted for, leaving him floundering in a game he didn't realize he was playing. The crescendo of her plan continued to build as she orchestrated incidents that seemed spontaneous but were anything but. Opportunities were manipulated, errors magnified, and the very people he relied upon became instruments of his own undoing, all silent, invisible, and devastatingly effective. And all the while, she remained poised, calm, a figure of composed normalcy as she observed the dominoes fall, savoring the slow, inevitable collapse of the man who had once believed he could control everything. By the time he began realizing that something was amiss, it was already too late. Every strategy he had relied upon, every calculated move, had been anticipated, undermined, and twisted to serve her plan. And the realization hit him in the coldest way imaginable. He was completely powerless against a woman he had always underestimated. Each morning, he awoke hoping to regain some control, only to find his carefully constructed reality shifting beneath him as if the ground itself were conspiring to betray him. His colleagues, once loyal and unquestioning, now exchanged subtle glances, whispered behind closed doors, and questioned his judgment in ways so discreet that he could neither prove nor confront. The whispers gnawed at him, eroding the authority he had wielded effortlessly for years. Socially, the impact was just as devastating. Invitations he sent for dinners or gatherings were ignored or declined with excuses so plausible they could not be challenged, and casual remarks from friends were carefully phrased to sow doubt about his reliability and character. Even his closest allies began to hesitate, second-guessing their support, all part of her meticulous strategy to isolate him and expose vulnerabilities he never knew he had. And yet, she never interfered directly. Her strength lay in invisibility, in allowing the perfect chaos to emerge naturally from the environment she had engineered. Financially, she struck with precision. Subtle miscalculations in investments, minor errors in contracts, and delayed communications were orchestrated to create tension, to make him question his decisions, and to magnify every misstep into a potential disaster. He was drowning in crises, both real and perceived, unaware that the mastermind behind it all sat quietly in the shadows, documenting, adjusting, and preparing for the ultimate reveal. He began to obsess over details that had never mattered before, replaying interactions, rereading emails, analyzing phone calls, trying desperately to identify the source of his unraveling. Every attempt to restore control only deepened the chaos, and every person he confronted had already been carefully influenced to either mislead or destabilize him. Nights became sleepless, haunted by fear, paranoia, and the gnawing sense of inevitable failure. The psychological strain consumed him. He began to lose trust in himself, in his instincts, in the very foundation of the life he had built. And all of it was exactly what she intended. The slow erosion of confidence, the careful dismantling of arrogance, the exposure of every hidden flaw. She had studied him for years, observed patterns, learned the reactions he thought were private, and exploited them with precision that bordered on genius. His attempts at retaliation or recovery were anticipated, manipulated, and turned against him, leaving him increasingly frustrated and confused. At home, no sanctuary existed. He entered rooms expecting comfort or familiarity, only to find subtle disruptions, unnoticed changes, and hints that his private life was no longer private. A misplaced item here, a carefully timed phone notification there, even casual remarks from family members subtly adjusted to heighten uncertainty, all orchestrated with surgical care to destabilize him further. The slow unraveling extended to his closest relationships, friendships, once considered unshakable, alliances he had relied upon for decades. She planted doubt, subtly influencing conversations, creating misperceptions that would fester and fracture loyalties. He tried to identify the source, but each trail led to confusion, dead ends, or misdirection, and he began to internalize the instability, questioning his competence and sanity. And yet, through it all, she appeared serene, almost ordinary, a master of subtlety, concealing the storm she had unleashed. She became the invisible force behind his downfall, watching every reaction, logging every error, and calculating the perfect sequence for ultimate exposure. He could feel himself slipping, the walls of his empire cracking, but could not pinpoint the architect of his ruin. Each day brought a new minor catastrophe, strategically sequenced to destabilize and amplify the pressure. A client meeting gone awry, a forgotten email, a misquoted remark. None appeared intentional to an outsider, but to her, they were carefully orchestrated steps in a grand design. And as he struggled, she remained composed, a silent observer, savoring the elegance of her plan, knowing the crescendo was near. Her strategy was multi-layered. She destabilized him professionally, socially, financially, and emotionally, ensuring that when the ultimate reveal came, it would be complete and undeniable. Every person he thought he could trust had been subtly influenced, every network he relied upon corrupted without his knowledge, every foundation of power he had built hollowed out by invisible hands. Slowly, he began noticing inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. Emails vanished, deals fell through without explanation, relationships became strained beyond recognition. The realization began to dawn. He was no longer the puppet master, but the puppet, dancing on strings he couldn't see. Panic set in, but it was too late. Each reaction was anticipated, each countermeasure preempted, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in every aspect of life. And yet, she never rushed, never revealed herself, understanding the psychological impact of gradual, inevitable dismantling. She allowed tension, doubt, fear, and despair to do the heavy lifting. Every misstep he made under stress reinforced her position. Every moment of frustration advanced her control. He became obsessed with understanding the source, trying to identify the saboteur, unaware that it was the one person he had underestimated all along. The thrill of his unraveling fed her strategy, the slow, deliberate perfection of her revenge more satisfying than any sudden confrontation could have been. He began to question everything, his decisions, his instincts, even his identity. Every interaction became suspect, every plan fragile, every achievement hollow. She had created an environment where he could no longer trust anyone. not because she had revealed herself, but because the world around him had been subtly adjusted to instill doubt and fear. And when he finally confronted someone, expecting answers or support, he received only carefully manipulated responses that deepened his isolation and reinforced the power she held. His empire, both personal and professional, teetered on the brink, a precarious structure built on foundations she had methodically undermined for months. Each day, each moment, each interaction contributed to the slow, inevitable collapse. And through it all, she maintained composure, appearing unaffected, almost mundane, while orchestrating the perfect exposure that would leave him humiliated, powerless, and finally aware of the scale of her vengeance. His paranoia peaked as he started imagining conspiracies, enemies, and betrayals that might not even exist, all while she silently smiled, knowing that every fear, every misstep, every fracture had been precisely engineered by her own meticulous planning. His world was unraveling, and he couldn't stop it, couldn't predict it, and could certainly not escape it. It was a psychological masterpiece, the kind of revenge that left no scars visible to the untrained eye, but shattered every aspect of the victim's life from the inside out. And as he wrestled with the growing realization that he had been outplayed, she was already several steps ahead, preparing for the final sequences that would expose everything he had tried to hide, strip away every illusion of control, and leave him utterly defeated, powerless, and exposed to the world that he had always thought he controlled. The slow burn of her revenge reached into every corner of his life, leaving nothing untouched, nothing sacred, and nothing reliable. His confidence, reputation, relationships, and sense of invincibility all eroded under her silent, intelligent, and devastating orchestration. By the time the ultimate revelation approached, he had become a shadow of the man he once was, consumed by fear, uncertainty, and despair, entirely unaware that the woman he had underestimated was standing at the helm, smiling, prepared to deliver the final act that would forever define the consequences of underestimating the quiet ones. By now, the pattern was unmistakable, yet he refused to acknowledge the truth, clinging desperately to the illusion of control, thinking that luck or chance might yet restore his crumbling life, unaware that every move he made was anticipated and manipulated with surgical precision. His colleagues, once deferential and supportive, had subtly aligned with the perception she orchestrated hesitations in meetings, questioning of his proposals, subtle eye rolls at his directives, all invisible to him but carefully catalogued in her mind, each a tiny fracture in his facade of invincibility. Even his personal relationships suffered, as she engineered interactions that cast doubt on his reliability, his intentions, and his integrity. Friends began pulling away, claiming misunderstandings or miscommunications, while family members expressed concern over decisions that seemed trivial but were, in fact, carefully manipulated to isolate him. He sought solace in familiar routines, in work, in social rituals, but every sanctuary was now a battlefield where she had already positioned invisible traps, creating tension, uncertainty, and fear at every turn. She had mastered patience, understanding that the most devastating revenge is never sudden but builds slowly, feeding on the target's arrogance, ignorance, and blind confidence. Even minor setbacks were amplified. A missed email became a significant contract lost. A misinterpreted message escalated into conflict with trusted allies, and every perceived mistake reinforced his growing paranoia. Sleep became an enemy as his mind raced with speculation, trying to trace the source of his unraveling, never suspecting the woman who had been silently orchestrating his downfall for months. The beauty of her strategy lay in its subtlety. No single action exposed her, no overt confrontation risked her plan, and no direct accusation was ever needed. The chaos unfolded naturally, a perfect storm crafted from patience, intelligence, and precise observation. Financially, she had already planted seeds of doubt and error, manipulating minor investments, encouraging seemingly innocent suggestions from advisors, and timing her interventions to maximize the impact of each decision he made. Every miscalculation, no matter how small, contributed to a cumulative collapse, and he remained blissfully unaware that the structure of his empire was being hollowed from within. Socially, the pressure was relentless. Invitations were misdirected, rumors whispered, small mistakes magnified, every interaction subtly twisted to erode trust, confidence, and credibility. Even the people closest to him acted in ways that reinforced her influence, some unknowingly, some deliberately, all moving him toward the inevitable confrontation with the reality he had denied for so long. At work, the minor disruptions escalated, meetings derailed, reports disappeared, allies questioned motives, and the once seamless operation of his empire became a tangle of confusion and doubt. Colleagues who had once been supportive became distant or subtly antagonistic, and he could not fathom why. Every attempt at intervention was anticipated, deflected, and redirected by her invisible hand. She had become the unseen director of his life, controlling outcomes without ever stepping into the spotlight. allowing him to feel as though he was still making choices, while in reality, every decision advanced her design. And yet, she maintained a calm exterior, a composed, almost indifferent facade, masking the intensity of satisfaction that surged through her as each stage of her plan unfolded exactly as intended. Her psychological mastery was complete. He was now doubting his instincts, questioning his memory, and struggling to distinguish reality from manipulation. Panic set in, though he could not articulate it, manifesting in sleepless nights, jittery hands, and a constant state of alert, anticipating threats that were carefully manufactured to destabilize him. Even small errors, previously inconsequential, now carried immense weight because she had arranged for them to ripple outward, affecting multiple aspects of his life simultaneously. The isolation was deliberate. By the time he sought guidance, the people he trusted were either subtly aligned with her plan or conditioned to provide misleading feedback, leaving him unable to find clarity or support. He floundered, every attempt to regain control feeding into the narrative of his vulnerability, accelerating the very outcomes he feared most. She had created a perfect psychological labyrinth where every choice led to tension, every interaction reinforced doubt, and every move made him weaker, less confident, and more susceptible to manipulation. As the weeks progressed, he began to notice patterns but could not connect the dots, attributing his misfortunes to coincidence, bad luck, or human error, never realizing that a single architect was orchestrating the chaos with methodical brilliance. And the closer he came to understanding the depth of his unraveling, the more tangled the web became, each revelation carefully sequenced to compound his fear, guilt, and frustration. She remained the silent observer, calculating, adjusting, and savoring each subtle victory as he stumbled deeper into uncertainty. His confidence, once unshakable, was now eroded to near nothing, replaced by hesitation, doubt, and paranoia that clouded every decision. He attempted to confront issues directly, but each action had been anticipated, and every confrontation only magnified his perceived failures. It was not enough for him to lose control externally. She sought to dismantle his identity, to expose the man he believed himself to be as fragile, flawed, and powerless as the circumstances now made him feel. Every domain of his life had been infiltrated: professional, personal, social, and emotional, and every interaction had been manipulated to advance the outcome she envisioned. Even minor gestures became instruments of her strategy. A casual nod, a simple question, a passing comment, all carefully calculated to reinforce her control, amplify his uncertainty, and further isolate him. By now, he was a shadow of the man he had once been, constantly second-guessing himself, questioning motives, and obsessively analyzing interactions that had once seemed mundane. She had mastered the art of controlled chaos, creating the illusion of randomness while orchestrating every effect with precision. And as he spiraled, she prepared the final stages of her plan, where the culmination of months of careful manipulation would finally become visible. The revelation would be undeniable, the humiliation complete, and the lesson painfully clear. The man who believed himself untouchable had been outplayed, underestimated, and dismantled by the very person he had thought powerless. As he frantically tried to piece together what had gone wrong, she allowed subtle clues to surface: carefully timed messages, strategically misdirected evidence, and the calculated exposure of truths he had believed buried. The tension reached its peak, each interaction a test of his unraveling, every conversation a carefully orchestrated trap to bring him closer to the final revelation. And yet, through it all, she remained composed, almost serene, the embodiment of patience and calculated brilliance. Her satisfaction was quiet but immense, knowing that the culmination of her plan would leave him utterly exposed, powerless, and confronted with the consequences of his arrogance and betrayal. The psychological torment she had orchestrated was unmatched. He was haunted by uncertainty, his judgment paralyzed, his relationships fractured, and his sense of self destabilized. Slowly, methodically, she tightened her grip, letting the environment she had crafted amplify every misstep, magnify every error, and accelerate the collapse of the man who had once believed himself untouchable. And finally, after months of invisible maneuvering, the stage was set. The people he trusted were in place, the timing was perfect, and the sequence of revelations was orchestrated to maximize impact. He could feel the walls closing in, the invisible noose tightening, yet he still didn't understand the origin of the storm. And when the first domino fell in the public eye, exposing him in ways that were both humiliating and irreversible, the full scope of her genius became undeniable. It was not violence or anger that defeated him, it was intelligence, patience, and the relentless application of calculated psychological pressure. The empire he had built with pride and arrogance crumbled in the quietest, most devastating manner imaginable, leaving him powerless, vulnerable, and fully exposed. She stood silently, watching the culmination of her plan with a calm satisfaction, knowing that she had dismantled not only his control but the very perception of the man he had thought himself to be. leaving him to confront the consequences of underestimating her and the quiet power of methodical, intelligent revenge. The moment had arrived, the culmination of months of meticulous planning, psychological manipulation, and silent observation, and he was completely unprepared for the revelation that would shatter everything he had ever believed about control, loyalty, and power. He walked into the office that morning with the same overconfident stride, unaware that every glance, every whisper, and every minor disruption he had dismissed over the past months had been a carefully orchestrated precursor to the unveiling of his downfall. The subtle tension in the air, the almost imperceptible shifts in his colleagues' expressions, and the faint glances exchanged behind his back should have warned him, but arrogance had blinded him to all signs of danger. And then she acted not with a scream, not with confrontation, but with precision and impact so powerful that it left him exposed, humiliated, and powerless in the eyes of everyone he thought he commanded. She revealed evidence, small pieces accumulated over months of observation, perfectly sequenced to tell a story of betrayal, incompetence, and deception, leaving him scrambling to defend himself against a wave of consequences he could no longer control. Clients questioned his judgment openly, colleagues withdrew support at critical moments, and friends and family who had once trusted him began demanding answers to questions he could not plausibly deny. The empire he had built with years of arrogance and manipulation crumbled before his eyes, each collapse magnified by the psychological torment she had carefully nurtured through months of silent orchestration. And as he struggled to comprehend what had gone wrong, she stood calmly, observing the chaos she had engineered, her presence unassuming but undeniably powerful, the very embodiment of a storm that had been quietly gathering strength while he remained oblivious. Every attempt he made to deflect blame, justify actions, or regain control was anticipated and neutralized, leaving him increasingly desperate. His authority eroded to nothing, and his confidence shattered. She had crafted a perfect balance between exposure and invisibility, ensuring that the maximum number of people witnessed his unraveling without ever suspecting the orchestrator of his collapse. Publicly, he was humiliated, yet the personal toll was far greater. Relationships strained to breaking points, loyalties fractured irreparably, and every interaction became a reminder of how thoroughly his life had been manipulated by the woman he had assumed powerless. The satisfaction she felt was profound, not out of cruelty, but the recognition of the intellectual precision, patience, and mastery required to execute a revenge of this magnitude without leaving a trace of impatience or desperation. He had spent his life believing that control, power, and charisma could protect him from consequences, yet she had shown him that patience, intelligence, and subtlety could dismantle even the most formidable empire, silently and completely. And in the midst of his public and private ruin, she revealed the final piece, the personal betrayal, the hidden lies, the deceit he had considered invisible. His closest confidants, once unquestioningly loyal, were presented with evidence of manipulation, misdirection, and betrayal that he could no longer deny, leaving him alienated, exposed, and fully accountable for actions he had assumed would remain hidden forever. As the truth unfolded, he realized that every small misstep he had dismissed as coincidence, every failure he had blamed on others, every fracture in relationships he had ignored had been part of her meticulous design. Panic gave way to despair, arrogance crumbled into helplessness, and he was left to confront the consequences of underestimating someone who had quietly observed, calculated, and executed a plan far beyond anything he had imagined. Financially, professionally, socially, and emotionally, his life was in ruins, a testament to the power of intelligence, patience, and strategy. And yet, she remained calm, the storm itself contained within a composed figure, smiling quietly at the perfect execution of her revenge. Her presence, a reminder that power is not always visible, control is not always loud, and justice can be delivered with patience rather than fury. In those moments, he understood the full scope of his underestimation, the arrogance that had blinded him to the intelligence and capability of the woman he had thought he could manipulate or ignore. He had been dismantled piece by piece, domino by domino, until he was left exposed in every sense of the word, and there was nothing he could do to recover the perception, influence, or authority he had taken for granted. And as she finally addressed him directly, not with anger but with the cold clarity of truth, the psychological weight of his ruin was complete. The betrayal he had hidden, the manipulation he had relied upon, and the arrogance he had wielded as a shield were all laid bare in front of everyone who mattered, leaving him humiliated, powerless, and fully aware of the consequences of underestimating her. The revelation rippled through every corner of his life. Professional partners severed ties, friends abandoned him, colleagues questioned his integrity, and family members who had once respected him now regarded him with suspicion and disappointment. Every relationship, every alliance, every perception he had cultivated over years collapsed in the wake of her carefully orchestrated exposure. And yet, she remained composed, almost serene, a master of controlled destruction, knowing that the slow unraveling had amplified the impact of the final reveal beyond what a sudden confrontation could have achieved. He realized too late that the woman he had dismissed, underestimated, and betrayed had been silently planning her revenge from the very beginning, turning every misstep, every arrogance, every weakness into instruments of his eventual downfall. The final moments were devastatingly public yet personal. Every error he had made, every betrayal he had hidden, every flaw he had assumed invisible now, laid bare before the eyes of colleagues, clients, friends, and family alike. There was no escape, no excuse, no justification, only the stark, undeniable truth of his unraveling. And as the reality of his complete defeat settled over him, she delivered the closing act of her plan, a quiet confrontation, not filled with rage, but with precise exposition of how she had watched, waited, and manipulated every element of his life, revealing the brilliance and patience behind the totality of his destruction. It was a lesson in power, patience, and intelligence, a stark demonstration that the quiet ones are often the most dangerous, and that underestimation can carry consequences far greater than anyone could imagine. And while he crumbled, humiliated and powerless, she stood as the epitome of control, the embodiment of a meticulously executed plan that had dismantled his professional, personal, and social life with precision and patience unmatched by any overt act of vengeance. By the end, he was a hollow version of the man he had once been, every illusion stripped away, every source of pride exposed, every network of trust irreparably fractured, and every ounce of arrogance eradicated. She had proven, without a single violent act, without a loud confrontation, that intelligence, patience, observation, and subtlety could dismantle even the strongest, most arrogant individuals entirely. And as she turned away from the wreckage of the life he had built, a quiet satisfaction settled within her, a recognition that justice, when executed with brilliance and patience, could be more devastating than any act of impulsive fury. The lessons he had refused to see became undeniable, etched into the ruins of his reputation, confidence, and authority, leaving him to grapple with the magnitude of underestimating someone whose silence masked far more than he could have imagined. The empire he thought unassailable was gone, every fortress breached, every ally lost, every secret exposed. And the man who believed himself untouchable now fully understood the devastating consequences of arrogance and betrayal. And in that quiet, final moment, she allowed herself a small, victorious smile, knowing that her revenge had been perfect, precise, and complete, leaving him with nothing but the bitter realization that he had been outplayed, outfought, and ultimately undone by the one person he had believed powerless. As the office cleared, whispers of disbelief spreading, she walked past him once more, not gloating, not shouting, merely composed, a figure of quiet strength and intelligence, leaving him to face the consequences he had never imagined, and the world to recognize the true power of patience, strategy, and silent revenge. And before anyone closes this story, remember, revenge does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers, observes, waits, and then strikes with a precision so devastating that the victim never even sees it coming. So if you felt the tension, the suspense, and the silent brilliance of this story, hit subscribe, leave a like, and comment, because stories like these remind us that intelligence, patience, and observation are sometimes the deadliest weapons of all.